And AI is going to take over and ruin our jobs, and companies are laying off lots of designers, saying we don't need you anymore, the AI will do it. Well, that's wrong.
Today's guest truly needs no introduction. He coined the term user experience while working at Apple, co-founded the Nielsen Norman Group, and wrote the book, The Design of Everyday Things, considered a Bible of UX.
Join the companies that are designing it so you can be one of the designers who turn it into a collaborator rather than a competitor.
John Norman is widely regarded as the godfather of UX.
And stop saying you're a wonderful designer, because if you're going to be up there in the administration making these major changes in the company, you have to be a company person, not just one little area.
In this episode, we cover everything from AI's impact on design jobs to how designers can earn a true seat at the executive table, and why his most famous book is now, in his words, wrong. Thanks so much for joining me today. I'm looking forward to this conversation. Absolute pleasure having you on.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you. Wow. First, you've been around since the start. So I kind of wanted to take you back to where it all began. You were at the heart of AI and HCI's early development, mentoring Jeff Hinton, who's the godfather of AI, and collaborating with Rummelhart, just make sure I get that right. It's going back a few years, but what was it like in those early days, setting the foundations and shaping how we build and design today?
Actually, those were the good years, I think, because things have changed today because of the impact of the new AI systems. The unfortunate impact, because I think people, it's basically there's a hype cycle, and AI is going to take over and ruin our jobs, and companies are laying off lots of designers, saying we don't need you anymore, the AI will do it. Well, that's wrong. First of all, the AI is not really there yet, and second of all, even when it does get better and better, I believe that we will learn to use it, and it will make us better and better. So, but that means there are lots of people who are afraid today of their jobs, and people are losing their jobs, and unnecessarily, because companies are firing thousands and thousands of people, the big companies, and but they're going to regret it. They're going to have to hire them back, because AI isn't ready to take over the jobs. It may be ready to help your jobs, but well, anyway, we can go to that later. So in the early days, it was very different. The difference was that we had to convince companies that it was bad for their business to have stuff that people couldn't use and couldn't understand. And it was costing them money, because people would sometimes hesitate to buy, or would be calling their service lines and costing them a lot of money. And so, but I think that there was quite a bit of success. And right now, I think the principles of knowing how to design well are well known and well distributed. They're not always followed, because it's still the case that the design parts of companies, with the exception of industrial design, which seems to dominate, the kind of design we do is always thought of as an extra cost. And the people who run this are never people in power. And so I've been arguing that it's our own fault. It's the design profession's fault that we don't have enough people who are chief design officers of company, or even chief executive officers of large companies. Of design companies, sure, of course, but large companies, very, very few. In fact, the one that seems to come to mind most frequently is Airbnb, where it's a RISD design graduate who runs it. And I've been talking to them. They actually have really, I think, a very good philosophy of what they're doing. But it's rare. And why is it rare? Designers say, how come my supervisors, my bosses don't appreciate what we're doing? And I say, well, how do you explain it to them? Well, we show them the wonderful awards we've won, and we show them these wonderful concepts that we've drawn. And I say, well, if I were the executive and you were trying to convince me to take more attention to you, I would say, oh, yes, thank you. Of course, we know you're very good. That's why we hired you. But excuse me, I must now get back to work. If you want to convince them to do something, you have to be able to understand the company, because you don't tell them how good you are. Tell them, look, we have these ideas that the company could do, which will actually be beneficial to the company. You'll either lower your costs, or this is a new product line that will increase your profits. But you have to demonstrate that it's an increase. You have to give them an argument. And the argument, well, we have to learn to speak the language of our customers. And our most important customers are the people we work for. And their language is spreadsheets and finance. So you have to say, here's how we will increase sales, and look at the increase in profits and increase in margins. And all my design friends have said, what are you talking about? We're doing this whole new idea. How do we know what the increase in sales will be and the increase in margins? And I say, marketing does it. Doesn't marketing convince you to put in all these extra features that you think are nonsense? How do they do it? Well, they present spreadsheets. Where do they get the numbers? They make them up. They guess. And you could, and they lie basically. So you can lie. In fact, if you don't think you can lie, why don't you become friends with marketing? Have them help you make this case. Because look, the executives are not stupid. That's what they used to do, is make up the numbers, because there's no other choice when you're making a new idea.
They're
So
forecasts, right?
they
So
will ask you, they will say, what are your assumptions? And you have to make a really good case that the assumptions you're making and the numbers you're making are pretty realistic. They may not come to pass, but you're making the best possible guess about what the future might be. And this is how you convince them. And stop saying you're a wonderful designer, because if you're going to be up there in the administration making these major changes in the company, you have to be a company person, not just one little area. And I say, what about engineers? They were trained in a very narrow way, just like designers are trained in a narrow way. How do they get up at the top? And my friends say, oh, well, they went and got an MBA. And I say, yeah, so why don't you? Not every designer, but enough designers in the group that there's at least one or two in every design group.
what do you think's holding design back? Because like it is a fascinating topic, right? Like why are engineers better suited to be CEOs or running businesses? Why aren't designers?
Well, I think it's because engineering, everybody knows, is a very difficult, complex topic, and you don't understand what they're talking about. And it took years of training in school and also practice in the company. And the same with economics. They use all these wonderful mathematics and so on, even though the economists are almost always wrong. Because their mathematics, finance is all about people, and the economists don't understand people. But that's a different story. I think that when it comes to basically anything dealing with human behavior, people don't understand why we are needed. They say, well, I'm a person. I've been a person all my life. I understand people. Why do I need you? And when people have trouble with the equipment, there's a tendency for the engineering to say, stupid people. Well, and I say, yeah, okay, but that's who you have to design for. You have to take people the way they are, not the way you'd like them to be. But the people aren't logical. And I say, that's right. Logic was invented by philosophers and mathematicians. That's not how people operate. And you have to learn to deal with the real people. And then I tell them, half of your customers will have IQs less than 100. And what? I don't know anybody with an IQ less than 100. Well, actually, 50% of the world has an IQ less than 100. The IQ scale is carefully calibrated so that the average is 100. So there are just as many people below 100 as above 100. And by the way, the IQ is what the IQ test measures. It measures how well you take an IQ test. It doesn't mean that you aren't any good, or it doesn't mean that you're super good. People with really high IQs often don't succeed very well in the world. People who have lower IQs, well, it just means they didn't take school seriously or something, but they could be brilliant. And so you have to deal with people. Forget all these things. Just figure out who's going to be buying and using your product, and make sure they understand it and can use it. Well, this is a philosophy that simply is very hard for people to understand. But quite often, when you finally do accept the design people within your group, not there's off on the side, but actually works closely with the engineers, with the marketing, with the finance people, with the supply chain people, um, you discover actually we actually prevent real value.
I agree. And it's amazing how many companies still start by just building. They just start by building a product without doing the proper research, understanding what their users actually need. They just start building and seeing what works. Then they realize I will bring in design later in the picture, and it's a costly experience.
Well, there's still always a feeling that we bring in we can't. The designers say we want to be part of the decision making about what you're going to be making in the first place, and we have to be there the whole time. And one of the standard responses is, "Well, what do you mean? Uh, when we're all finished and we built it, then we'll call you in to make it pretty and make it usable." No.
So, how does design change this perception, right? They are thought of an afterthought, right? How does design make themselves be seen as the most integral part of a process to building a product? And
Well, I told you, I think it's because designers are so proud of their skills that they don't think about how do I actually convince my management. And the way you convince your management is by becoming part of management and understand. Look, it's not easy to be. I was a vice president at Apple, and um, and I've also been an executive at HP, and I also have consulted at with many companies. Um, it's not easy because there are many constraints that you have, and so that quite often that a really good idea will be turned down. I did this at Apple. I said I thought that we could do a better job of the operating system, that it ought to match the way people really work, which means, among other things, you have continual interruptions. You have to change whatever you're doing and surge to another set of tasks. And then you want to come back to where you used to be and be reminded of where you were. And the screen should return itself to exactly the position it was in when you left it, and so on and so forth. And we built what I call it ABC, activity-based computing. And I got permission from my fellow executives. I had a team of about 20 or 30 people for 6 or more months doing this work. So it was expensive. And when we made our final presentations, it was turned down. And it obviously was very disappointing. But in retrospect, it probably should have been turned down. We didn't design the right thing. The reason was it was too different from what we were already selling. And the executives could not see how we could introduce this completely different system onto the market. It would be very confusing for people. It should have been designed so it could be introduced slowly. We could put pieces into the existing system and slowly introduce it. We had to understand better the sales process and how people would treat it, and I failed at that. We didn't do that. So in retrospect, um, what this is getting to the point you asked. You really have to understand how the company works and how people buy things and what they pay for and what they're willing to take. So here's another example. We're polluting the world, and making the materials that we use, mining to get these exotic materials, and then using manufacturing methods that pollute the air and the water and the land, and using, in fact, packaging methods that are thrown away as waste when you're finished, and making things that last only a couple of years because that's what you make your money do. You make your money by selling products, so you want the product to last as short a period as makes sense. And it's about 2 years for a mobile, and it's about 5 years for the laptop or personal computer, but it's short. The automobile companies are the ones who actually master this first. They used to have an annual model change,
yeah,
not because it was needed, but so you could see, so you'd feel out of date. And every 4 or 5 years, they'd have a major change. You couldn't do it more often because it's very expensive. But then they would change the car so it looked different, so everybody knew that you were driving an old-fashioned car. Um, and this is crazy. And so, how do you stop it? Well, we know the answers. Circular economy, where you make things that last longer, are easier to repair, easier to upgrade, and that, or when you finally can't do it anymore, that you can reuse the components and the parts and the materials. So there should be no waste. Well, you can't tell your company that you're doing things wrong. Nobody, the company does not want people coming up and saying, "Here's what you're doing that's wrong." And as I try to point out to people, it's not that executives don't want to know what's wrong in their company. They need to know, but they want you to come and tell them the answer. And you can't tell them the answer is a circular economy, because I say, come on, we make our money selling products. And now you're trying to say they should last longer and be easier to repair. And well, no, how would it exist? And so you have to have an answer to that. Now, there is a standard answer. There are lots of different kinds of answers, but the most common answer is we sell a service. Because all these products are really services. We buy a new camera, but the camera is not what we really care about. What we care about is the photographs, the pictures. And the same with when you buy a new computer or a new cell phone or whatever. It's nice, you brag about it at first, but it's really how you use it and what it offers you. And so that's what we're going to offer them, a service. And you have to say, you're going to basically, you pay us a monthly fee, and we will make sure you always have the latest thing up to date, and we'll keep it fixed. If it breaks, we'll repair it. And but people hate services because you have to pay every month. Yeah, well, okay, but it won't be actually more expensive than you are paying now, actually. And take your mobile phone. You think you're buying the phone, it's your phone? Come on. Almost everybody goes to the phone store, and you discover you have a set of choices, and they tell you how much per month each of these will be. It's a service, really. You're paying them by the month, and every couple of years they'll let you get a new phone. You just keep paying them the same amount of money. So this already exists, except we don't call it that. They make believe you're buying the phone.
Yep. I like the idea because like if you could take this to Apple and go, hey, how do we get a phone? Because like you're right, after 2 years, camera, like everything needs upgrading. I don't want to have to go back to Apple and buy a new phone every 2 years.
But there are phones out that you can do. Why don't you open up the phone, unplug the camera, plug in the new version of the camera, and then keep. You don't have to change everything just because it's a better camera.
It's just working through like the cost analysis in my mind. Like if you could reuse a lot of the parts in, let's say, an iPhone, it makes a lot of sense because their cost of goods would go down quite a lot.
But here's the other thing. Somebody already pays that cost, but the economists call it externalities. So once you've destroyed the land and the air and the sea, and once people throw away their phones and and all their electronics junk, and it's all in big piles of mountains of trash burning sometimes because batteries, when they go old, start catching fire. That's true around the country, around the world. Actually, it's not true around the United States because we ship it to other countries for it to be in their country. And somebody pays those costs. But because they're called externalities, the company that causes these problems doesn't have to pay for it. If the company actually had to pay for the cost of repairing the environment and taking care of the junk that people discard, it would be cheaper just to be able to reuse the parts.
Very true. There's a company in Australia called Visi, and they basically sell cardboard boxes, but they have a recycling plan. So they get all of the cardboard through recycled products and they reuse it to sell that product on. So they're essentially just reusing the product, and their margins are huge because that's how they have designed the system. And I think it's an amazing approach.
Well, I have a laser printer made by Canon, and every so often you have to replace the toner, and it's a pretty expensive deal, but it comes in a mechanical metal part. It's a fairly complex device, the toner kit. But what Canon does is that when you buy the new one, they say, okay, take the old one and put it back in this box, and then here's a QR code. You can use it to print out a new mailing label. And so you can mail it back to us at no cost to you. and we will reuse the parts, and we will guarantee that there'll be no waste. The old toner that can be used actually as road fill, fertilizer, all sorts of process. So we sell it, and then the old parts, the metal parts, we either reuse them completely exactly as they are, or we melt them down and just remake them into the new parts. And they say there's no waste, and that's only a small part of the printer, but the printer actually lasts about, well, my printer's about 10 years old already. Uh, so, but there are many companies that are doing this. Again, when I say many, it's still a small percentage, but it demonstrates that it can be done.
So how do like where does it start? Where does the change start? Because like, I can understand the ROI of it. How do you fit it into your business model? Who starts it? Is it design that needs to start designing this, or is it the CEOs who needs to start thinking about how they can?
Well, there are two ways. One is the CEOs can do it, but it's hard because some companies have done this already. They already are changing what they're doing and how they're doing it, and they're advertising and trying to say, buy us because we are more responsible. But the major way is going to be political. Almost every difficult and big problem ends up being political. And there's nothing the matter with that, because politics, the good part of politics is that different people view things from different angles, and they often, therefore, have very different opinions that are contradictory to one another. But if you can understand that from their point of view, whatever they're saying is actually true and correct, and so these different points of view lead often to these dissenting opinions. And therefore, you can reach a compromise or reach ways of going forth. And the destruction of the planet is pretty obvious. It's very difficult to understand why people don't appreciate that, which is the United States used to be one of the leaders in understanding it. And right now, it's way back to being the follow. Well, we destroyed everything that we've been doing. But in general, I think it's the political arm that can start enforcing this. First of all, let's change the tax code and the about externalities. That it's responsible for you to be responsible for the external harm that you are doing. Lots of people have been advocating this for actually many years,
Yeah,
but it's companies with power don't wish to have that happen. So you
yeah,
have to, but what you can do is you can try to give them some time. Say we're going to reduce it over this period of time, maybe slowly. And meanwhile, we hope that you will start switching over to a different way of manufacturing and selling your goods, so that in the end it'll be just fine. In fact, if you can really reuse everything, it may be cheaper for you. You may actually end up making more profits than before. There will be a difficulty in the transition, and that's where the governments can come in and be helpful. First of all, by forcing it. Look, here's a good example of safety in automobiles. I'm old enough to be around when in the people, the automobile companies refused to talk about safety. They wouldn't let you mention safety. They were afraid if you talked about making a car safer, even if they agreed that this would make it safer, if you start advertising we're making the car safer, that implies they're not safe today, and we don't want our customers to think that. So it took the government to force seat belts and to force crumple zones in the cars and to force all sorts of safety improvements. And at first, the automobile manufacturers really strongly resisted it. The only company that really seemed to do things was Volvo, the Swedish company, and so people made fun of Volvo. Oh, that's for university professors. Uh, but
did you have one?
actually, I never had a Volvo. But the what happened is it slowly. Not only did every car manufacturer have it, but today they advertise the safety features. It took a long time. Well, it's going to take a long time. Then we better hurry up and start right now.
Well, so going back to your example of the operating system at Apple, right? You went a little bit too all in with your solution, where if you thought you chunked it down, maybe it would have got across the line. It's the same with this, right? Like you're not going to be able to turn your company into a fully optimized machine to sort of have a circular give back. You could break it into smaller chunks and go, all right, let's focus on this bit, then this bit, and then sort of get there in the end. But that's where you start, right? You're never going to be able to solve the whole.
Yeah, well, actually, take a look at the transition from coal and oil burning power plants to more sustainable sources. Lots of companies have said they will do that, and in the uh, prior to our current president, companies were really incentivized to do that, but they were told the goal is to do this by 2030. The goal is to have made that switch over, because everybody recognized that even if you did it, you can't immediately switch to wind and sun and hydroelectric or other or nuclear, because all those take time, a really long time to build, and cost money, and more importantly, when you usually where the sun and the wind are best for making power is not where people are living. And so you need transmission lines. And so quite often you can build windmills and you can build solar cells in a year or two. But to get permission to transmit the power and build new transmission lines, that can take 10 years. Um, Everybody wants it, but nobody wants it near where they live. The NIMBY, not in my backyard philosophy.
I don't want it in my backyard. I want to circle back to something we were talking about earlier. Like a lot of the people that listen to this podcast are, let's say, design leaders. And I think everyone's always talked about wanting a seat at the table and having more ownership of what happens, but they seem to lack the skills. And it's clear because they're not sort of going outside the craft side of things that seems to be the problem. We kind of touched on it, but I want to dig a little bit deeper into it because I think it's a very common conversation that I have, and I think it's something that needs to change in design. Where would you start if you're in design to go, for me, to add value to the business that I work in or what I'm doing, I need to understand other areas of the business and be able to, I guess, drive that back to value of revenue or how it's going to reduce costs or whatever else is happening in the business.
You have to learn about the company. When I was at Apple, I remember we had a really good finance person in my division working for me. And one day he told me he wanted to leave. And why? You're very good, et cetera, et cetera. He says, yes, but I really want to have I want to get promoted in the company. And I want to learn about the other divisions. So I've asked if I can get a position in marketing, and they've agreed. And after marketing, I want to go to manufacturing. And after manufacturing, I want to work in sales. And well, that's one way to move up. In fact, lots of companies actually do that. There's many companies have this special training. If you are going to come into as an executive, so actually they will hire people to be future executives. And what they'll do is they'll give them assignments. So they'll move them every couple of years, every year or two, to a different area, to a different part of the company. So they have this broad experience. Actually, the United States military does that. That the officers who are on a sort of a career path, they will move them around every 2 years. And so they end up as senior officers, generals, admirals. They have experienced a lot of this. Now, there's a negative to that, is that when they come into a new installation, they know they're going to be there. They're going to be in charge of this little area, this new research section, or maybe it's a training section, or maybe it's even a military ongoing situation. But everybody knows you're there just for 2 years. And so, first of all, they may not pay attention to what you say. And second of all, you think it's really important that I make some major contribution in these 2 years. So you immediately start doing something that's really big, which probably doesn't finish in 2 years. And so it's not always, it's difficult to do this in the company, where you shouldn't put the person in charge for only 2 years. But
But
that's how they get their experience, and it is so it is good at training people. It's not necessarily good for the efficiency of the units.
it's like the US presidency, right? Like you've got one president that goes hard in one direction, the next one comes in for their 4 year cycle and goes in the other direction. There's no like singular direction, which
I don't think that's unique to the United States presidency.
no, no, but it's the most known example.
Because I think that people are not happy with government, and so there's a tendency to say, "Oh, get rid of the existing government. Let's try the new one."
Yeah.
And but but the point is, back to the real point. If you really want to have a say and understand what's going on, well, you have to have the knowledge that's required to have a say, and that's why an MBA is useful, because it's not necessary, but it's a very fast learning field. You have for 2 years, you're going to learn a little bit about each area. You're not going to learn enough to be an expert in the areas, but you learn enough to be a manager, so you can understand what's going on. And because basically, to simplify life, there are two kinds of people. There are generalists and there's the specialists. And the specialists are what universities teach specialists. That's what they love to do. And so you have to major in a subject, and then when you major in a topic, there are many specialties of that topic, and you have to choose a specialty. And as you go higher and higher up in education, you become more and more specialized. If you become a master's degree, well, again, in a specialization. If you want a PhD, that's even more specialized. You become an academic, that's even more specialized. And so when the academic transitions to industry, it turns out their specialty could be very valuable, but they won't be a leader unless they can get out of that specialty and become more broad. And generalists are often in the university. Generalists are not prized because they're not good at anything, but they know a tremendous amount of different topics. And I say, if you assume that the area of what they know is what's important, well, the specialist is very deep and narrow, and the generalist is very broad and relatively shallow. They may have one or two areas where they're deeper, but mainly they're broad and shallow. But guess what? It's your generalists who actually do things. You can't create something from a specialty. A specialty requires all sorts of other specialties, and you need somebody who can actually bring them all together and make sure it all works and so on. And that's your generalist. And so it's a generalist that it's actually not help. The universities don't understand them. They don't know how to promote them.
Um, my background, I was a specialist and then I started a business, which teaches you to become a generalist because you have to learn everything: marketing, finance, human resources, recruitment, everything. And I think for me to be able to lead people, I have to understand what they do, how they do it, and I have to work with them to run the business.
Yeah, but you're lucky that you succeeded, because what often happens is somebody has this brilliant idea and they start a company with a brilliant idea and they say, well, I have new ideas, and they want to work on their ideas, and they discover their CEO, sorry, what you do is you spend all of your time trying to get money. Second of all, trying to hire people. Third of all, the people don't get along with each other. You have to become a psychiatrist to work with the different personalities and feuds, and you don't have any time to do what you really care about, which is developing the product. And so what the venture capitalists now do is they try to convince many people, this is a wonderful idea, we're going to fund you, and we're going to find a CEO for you. But I want to be the CEO. It's my idea. You can be the chief product officer. You can you can have all the major stock in the company. It doesn't matter. But you're going to find out that you don't want to be a CEO, and it's better to put you where you really want to be, which is helping develop the product. But some people actually turn out to be okay. They learn to be a CEO and get through it, and that's evidently what happened with you.
It wasn't easy, but it's been probably more enjoyable. It's one of the things I love the most about being in business is that I get to learn a whole bunch of new skills, and I just forever on this trajectory of learning. But I was going to ask you, because obviously you're front of business, but you were probably more of a specialist beforehand. Did you find it a difficult transition to go into running a business?
Yeah, well, I went to Apple. I thought I understood about all this stuff. I had already been consulting with Apple and consulting with other companies, uh, but I soon discovered that. Well, I mean, I had this same conversation once. I looked at the way the very first Apple Portable was coming out when I was there, and I thought it had lots of problems. And I went and I talked to the vice president in charge of it, and we had this really nice, long conversation. And when it was all over, he said, "I really enjoyed this conversation, but I now have to get back. I have to do my work." And that was an eye opener. So you see, I've used that same phrase now as well. And it turned out that they often, lots of ideas that I had, they were irrelevant. And quite often they would say, "Well, you're an expert. Here's a problem we have. What do you think?" And I would say, "Oh, that's a really interesting problem. We never thought about that. So I don't really know anything about that." And I realized that there were really good and deep problems that people faced, but the universities had no clue as to what was really important in the real world. And so why weren't the universities studying these problems that were really important and could make a difference? And so it took me a while to get that. The other thing is, I kept, since I reported at first to the CEO, uh, who was John Scully at the time, um, he would call me in his office periodically and say, "I want you to do this. I want you to do that." And I soon learned a lot. So one day he says, "I need you to be in New Jersey. That's on the other side of our country. Tomorrow morning. Here's your airline tickets." And so off I went, and we were talking to AT&T, the big telephone company, about they would possibly buy Apple. And so suddenly I was involved with a large number of marketing people and other disciplines, all working with the AT&T people, all being watched by lawyers. And I was really impressed with the way that marketing worked and the numbers, how they could spew out all sorts of wonderful figures and numbers and principles. Where did you get all that from? So I asked them, and they taught me. And so I slowly began to learn about all these other fields and when I eventually became a vice president, um, it was the Advanced Technology Group, which was really the research arm of Apple. And that was wonderful because I had people working for me doing all sorts of things. We were running schools, we were developing the video technique, we were developing good, some of the graphic things. We were doing language translation. We had an office in Singapore that was under my control. We had all sorts of things going on, and I had to learn about all of this. We had a manufacturing plant in Singapore. I had to go and visit and understand the manufacturing side. And so, but I found that wonderful. And what I did was when there was a group of people doing stuff I didn't understand, I would ask them to come and give me tutorials until I did understand. And so I learned a lot. I also learned about politics because I was asked to go and testify before the Federal Communications Commission in Washington, D.C., to get the very first Wi-Fi ban established in the United States. And so I also spent a week or 2 weeks, I think it was, in Washington, going with a lawyer who worked for us, guiding me as I went through and talked to the Congress people, and more important than the Congress people were their assistants, because their staff, they're so busy doing so many different things in so many different areas, they don't have time to read anything. And so the good ones have really good staffs who are experts who tell them what they should be saying and what they should be doing. But I learned about how politics works, and I had to fight against other people in order to make our opinions work. And later on, I was involved in a similar fight to get the high definition television standards because the television companies didn't want it. They just wanted the bandwidth. It was going to be digitalized. Oh, I can have 3 or 4 stations in the same space. I now have just one station. Oh, I can sell more advertisements. That's all they cared about. We cared about having much better pictures. And so, yeah, but for me, I'm always very curious. And so at heart, I'm a generalist, even though I had been trained as a specialist. And so for me, it was a good fit.
It's quite fascinating because you've obviously come from such a specialized background, and then you've just taken on all of this.
Yeah, but almost every if you take a look at most of the leaders of companies, it's similar.
And look, like if I turn this back into like a design, like designers love to talk about the craft, and they kind of, to a degree, seem like they're a little bit scared of generalizing their skill set and learning other areas of the business and how it all works together.
But that's true of all fields. That they really love doing the finance work. They really love being an engineer and being, the world's expert on some little tiny aspect of engineering, and that's good because we need those people.
I
So
agree.
it's not everybody. So lots of companies, uh, actually Apple too, have two different tracks. There's the engineer, there's a specialist track, and you get promoted, and you can get a pretty high salary, and you become, an engineer, and then there's all sorts of titles that go along with it. But there's also the administrative track, and you get promoted there, and you move on from area to area administering it. And usually, there's a limit for everybody except the administration, where when you start getting up into the vice president and then senior vice president and C-suite level, then that's different. You start getting more money, but which is interesting because the specialists always say, but the higher up you are, the less you seem to do. All you do is have meetings and so on.
Yeah.
Well, it's not that easy. In fact, yes, it's true you're having meetings, but you start working. It feels like 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because you're making the decisions that really matter to the company. So not everybody likes that, which is okay. But if you really want your field to have some say in the company, then several people in your field who you have to move up to that level, who understand the field. Now, at Apple, when I was there, fortunately, the fact that Apple in those days was known for something that was easy to use. You didn't have to have a manual. You could just buy the new computer, and you could learn to use it easily because it was sort of self-teaching. And in fact, when I one reason I went to Apple was I discovered that some of the early software for the first Macintosh have been developed by my former students. I I didn't even know that. I went and I met some of the people doing the software development, and they said, "Well, I took your course at UCSD." And and then the Apple Handbook, the user, the design guide, was actually written by one of my former PhD students, and so that Apple already was in that area. They understood this, and that made it easier for me as well when I moved in. And actually, what happened is when I moved in and I became an Apple Fellow, which meant I had no responsibilities. I could do anything I wanted. It was a fairly considered a
Sounds like
high.
a perfect job.
Yeah, a few companies have that. Bell Labs has always had it. Google has it. Other companies have something like that. IBM, I think, that's one of the major ones. And but um, all the usability people said, "Oh, let me. We have an office for you right in the middle of where we work." And I said, "No." Uh, that was a good decision of mine because I wanted to be in an area I didn't understand, and so I worked with the printing people, who the same person who had invented the laser printer at Xerox, who is now working at Apple, and that way I got to meet other people, and I got to meet the engineering teams, and it helped that I had 2 degrees in electrical engineering, so I could talk their language, and so Apple was a wonderful company for me to start because I didn't have to convince anybody. And when I said I thought the usability was going downhill, and I complained, um, well, their answer was, "Okay, you're in charge." And so that's where I brought together a few of people I knew, including one of my former students, and we tried to figure out what we should call ourselves, and we decided we would be the user experience architect for Apple. And I named my I gave myself the title of user experience architect, and we were the user experience group. And that's where the phrase user experience was first used in as a title in a company. Uh, Something like that. I it's interesting because there's been debates about where the name came from, and someone pointed out that Brenda Laurel had used the title, used the word user experience in an article she wrote, and I said, "Well, that's interesting," and I said, "Let me see the article." And the article turned out to be a chapter in a book that I had edited, and because I had found Brenda Laurel and discovered her. She was a theater major. She worked in theater, but she also worked at Apple. And so we thought she was wonderful. And we was writing a book about, we call it user-centered system design. She has a chapter in it. And so I finally, what I now write on my website is, I suspect that she used the term, and I obviously knew about it because I edited her chapter. And probably that's because couldn't remember where I got the notion for user experience, but I thought that's probably it. But still, she just talked about it, how important it was, whereas what I did was was use it as a title. But I now give her credit for inventing the phrase.
Must be pretty humbling. Being in design for such a long period, knowing everyone, seeing such change and just being a part of it, or your students or people that have learnt from you driving so much change. Like, you've kind of made the space all around you, really. It's cool.
Well, it didn't feel like that. It just felt like I was doing my best to try to make things that were usable and so on. And yeah, I'm surprised at how it's all turned out. Pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, I imagine. I wanted to touch on one thing.
But actually, I wanted to make sure you cover something.
Oh, do it then. Let's go.
I just This is the book I'm most known for,
Yes, that's your
and
that's
it's
the UX handbook.
yes, and I'm now saying it's wrong.
Okay.
And what's wrong about it? Well, actually, there's nothing wrong in the book. I still believe what's in the book. I still teach what's in the book. What's wrong is what's not in the book. And what's not in the book is a lot about what we've been talking about. And so when I did my fifth retirement in 2020, which I hope is the last retirement, what am I going to do now? Well, I'm really what kind of a designer am I? I design designers. I'm an educator. And so, yeah, but my books, I said, the world is falling apart in many different directions. And my books are nice, they're important, but they don't address these big problems. So I started to learn about the big problems. And I so ended up with this book, Designed for a Better World, that must be meaningful, sustainable, humanity centered, and in which I basically cover history, economics, the way economists work, the way manufacturing works, the way we're destroying the earth. I also spent a week in London just at the time when they opened up a new exhibit called The Waste Age at the London Design Museum. And so I learned a lot from that one visit. And so I tried to put into practice, tried to write what I thought had to be done, and I only wrote about things where I thought I had a unique approach to it. I'd like to tell people there are no new ideas in the book, and I think that's a virtue because it's not just me making up stuff. But creativity is not understood very well. There's nothing that people invent that isn't already all the parts are well known. What creativity is taking the stuff that's known and taking a whole new perspective and maybe thinking of a new area and then putting it together. And almost everything, all the scientific advances that we make, if you take a look at it, it's all based on stuff that was already known, but someone put it together in a novel way. And that's what I do. So I made sure I covered only the topics where I felt I have a different perspective, Because, as we said, I have this engineering background. I have a PhD in psychology. I also have been an industry executive. I've been involved a little bit in the political side. And so I thought I had a unique perspective for a few of these topics. And I also said I want to actually do what I'm talking about, not just write about it. So we started a charity called the Don Norman Design Award, where my friends wanted to have money and we would give it to some famous designer for doing really good work in society. And I said, no, famous designers don't need it. I know
True.
when I get an award, it's very nice, but it doesn't change what I do. When you need the reinforcement is when you're just starting out. So we said early career people in their first couple of jobs, those are the people we will reward. And I don't care what their training is. What I care about, have you accomplished something for societal good with evidence? And then I want to also reward the educational institutions that have trained them, and they have to have evidence. And the best evidence is not who the faculty is. The best evidence is the names of students who are now out doing that kind of work. And we just this year we started saying, let's reward companies, industry that are also supporting this work, either by the company itself or by allowing employees to do the work or by funding these activities. And I'm now trying to create a network because there are so many other small places, Design for Good, for example, that we mentioned earlier. Other organizations doing similar work, but each one of us is relatively small. And so if we can band together, we may actually have a much greater impact. It's a scaling problem. And there's a group in India that I worked with called the Center for Exponential Change, which is all about scaling. And the way you should scale is not by getting bigger and bigger and bigger, because then you become a bureaucracy and you're less effective. The way to scale is like a dandelion scale. One dandelion creates 10 more, and each of those 10 creates 10 more, and that's an exponential growth. Or by having a network where people can communicate and share ideas and learn, and where necessary, combine efforts to do something. So we started off with the Aga Khan Foundation, which is housed in Geneva and mostly works in Asia and Africa. And we partnered with them, and we're starting to partner with others. So I'm very excited by this charity because the work that people are doing is amazing. It's always small, but it's very impactful in the area where they're working.
You're very active for a retired person, Don.
Well, because
It just doesn't seem like you've slowed down at all.
I'm still young. I'm only 89, so I have a while to go.
Plenty of time. With all the advancements in technology, you've still got a fair few years left in you. Is this your legacy? Like, you've done so much for the space in design. Like, what's your legacy? What do you want it to be?
I guess I'm old enough that the legacy is already starting to develop, and it's what I really want is that. Well, it's the latest book, which is about trying to do things for society, for the world, to take into account the side effects of everything that we're doing, to worry about how we're treating cultures, how we are destroying lifestyles of all sorts, animals, insects, plants. Uh, and yet we live in this complex system where everything comes together to support human life as well. And so I want the legacy to be that, well, my legacy is actually mostly in my books and my students and the people I've trained. And I trained them not only for the ones who came through my courses, but a little bit through podcasts like this, but primarily through the books, which has reached millions of people. And I think that's the legacy.
I reckon every designer on my team has read your books. So knowing that you've had a part of every designer's life is incredible.
Well, of course, you know what I'm most famous for. I'm most famous for doors you can't work.
What?
Norman doors. Ever hear
I,
about Norman doors?
no, I have not. Sorry.
Well, there's a video. Group of people said they talked about doors in their offices they couldn't open them, and so the
Oh,
video,
yes. Yes, I do know this. So you
yeah.
had a
So
friend that got stuck in the
it,
door.
it's been watched 10, 12 million times or so, and So I find that amusing. That what I'm most famous for is doors you can't open. Norman doors, they're called.
Sorry, I did know that, and I
Mhm.
had watched it, and yeah, like uh, it's funny, but you've done
But
so much.
but the point being though that that video I think has been important in actually showing people that design can make a difference even in these trivial things. Because I point out that the same principles that are applied to most trivial things, like how do you know whether to push or pull a door, applies to complex things too, and it causes a lot. People who don't follow the same principles can cause real harm because serious accidents, killing people, and you see that in the self-driving automobiles business that the companies that don't pay attention to even the little details are killing people. The companies that work well are doing very well. So the Waymo cars in San Francisco and Los Angeles are wonderful. I use them every time I can because they're better drivers than real drivers, right?
I haven't had the chance. Every time I'm in like LA and they drive past, I'm like, how do I get one of them? They look so cool, but I've not been in one yet.
All you have to do is download the app
Oh, is it a
and
different
then
app?
just call one. That's it, and it shows
Huh?
up, and it has your name spitting on the top, and then
Rookie error.
only you can open the door with your phone.
Really? Okay. Next time in LA, that's what I'll be doing. It'll be the highlight of the trip. But Don, like there's so many things that we didn't touch on. We didn't even really talk about AI and the future and what you think of that. But like, it's been such a pleasure speaking to you. So, like, I can't thank you enough for jumping on.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to talk about AI. I'm kind of proud of the fact that one of my early postdocs who explained to me that I was wrong, which is good. I like people who tell me I'm wrong because if I'm wrong, I want to know. And just got the Nobel Prize for his work on neural networks, Jeff Hinton. Um,
I was going to ask you about that because he recently mentioned that he regrets some of the stuff that he did with like he recently expressed concerns about AI's trajectory.
well, I think we've invented a new type of intelligent, maybe call it a life form. It's a new kind of intelligence and it's going to be imperfect like all existing intelligences, especially if it's trained on human behavior. That's not the correct way to train it because human behavior is biased and limited, opinionated. But I think it's going to be very, very important. And will it take away people's jobs? Yes, every new technology always does that. But I'm telling the designers that what you should do is be using it, learning how to use it, and learning how it can make your life easier. It'll take away a lot of the routine stuff that we do that you may be proud of, that you're good at drawing or you're good at sketching or doing this, and it can do a good job. But it's not easy to have it do what you want to do. You have to learn how to use it to make it do what you care about, and it will do crazy things sometimes, but sometimes very insightful things. And so it can make you better, and moreover, it's very young, so every month it gets better. And so, but it's going to take 5 or 10 years before it really becomes the proper tool. And I'm saying, instead of complaining about it, why not join the companies that are designing it so you can be one of the designers who turn it into a collaborator rather than a competitor?
I actually had this conversation with Jacob, your friend, like 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and AI has been built by engineers and data analytics people, and design hasn't really been there. So
That's
there's
right.
so much space for design to support, help, and make it better or more usable.
Yeah. Now, when Jeff Hinton has his concerns, I don't think he's subject. These are very powerful, but they can be misused, and they can be used too early in their development when they're really not all where they can actually do harm today uh, without you even understanding that. So, but again, you have to remember it's been out publicly, the large language models, just for a few years. Now, if you look at data sciences, they have been using neural networks for a longer time, and they have done a large of major advances have been done through neural networks. And the difference between those and the large language models is the neural networks are trained specifically on the topic that you want it to work in, on molecular structures, say. or on a financial issue, on the real issues. Whereas the large language models have been trained on all the stuff ever written, which is a lot of it is nonsense, a lot of it is wrong, a lot of it is evil, but the systems can't distinguish among them. So we have to change the training methods. And on top of that, they're supposedly the model of the human brain, but they take kilowatts or megawatts of power to run, and the human brain takes 90 watts. And the human brain is a lot smaller, and yet is still more powerful than the large language models. So we have a lot to go. A lot of change can happen, but nonetheless, this is a revolutionary change that I think is going to change the world. And so but we have to learn to live with it, and maybe it has to learn to live with us.
True. Like, you actually mentioned something early about hype cycle. You've been around for a long time, and there's been lots of new technologies that have come and gone, the internet, everything like that. Like, I don't think AI is going anywhere. I think it's like, for me right now, it's like one of the most integral employees that I have. Like, what do you see the future? Like, what do you think this is just a hype cycle? Do you think this is going to change everything? You mentioned companies have fired a lot of their staff.
I think it's going to change everything, but not the way that people may think today. It will take a while. The internet, when it first happened, it was a wonderful advance and people used it for good. And it took a long time before it became public and got used by the public. And now the internet is responsible for a lot of the harm that's happening because it spreads false ideas. We have designed carefully the internet tools, the apps, so that they
Keep people.
yeah, so that people are essentially hooked on them, and the social
Mm.
networks are not. The social networks at first were wonderful. I was able to keep in touch with people hadn't seen or talked to for a long time. Video has helped a lot in many ways. The internet makes the videos possible, makes this conversation
Yeah.
possible, but it's also done a lot of harm. And but I think we're going to have the same thing with the AIs, except for the first time we've invented a technology that has its own intentions, its own understandings, is creative already, is doing interesting things. And as it gets more and more powerful, it will be autonomous. It will no longer require humans to control it. And so that's where the danger is.
It's a scary thought. There's a
But
lot of
that's
that.
also that may also be where the virtue is. So we have to understand this. But we've created a new life form, really. Not it's artificial life, but it's life. There's been all sorts of advances in biology, by the way, recently, especially as biologists are now thinking more about what intelligence is and what information processing is. And the newest philosophies about biology is that it's all about information. Even the smallest bacteria are processing and using information and often are goal directed. And now we move up to clumps of bacteria. We move up from single cells to clumps of single cells and multi-celled organisms. And as they develop a lot of, well, they become human beings and animals. And all of us have interior models, and humans are conscious. Some of the animals are probably conscious, but they all are intelligent. I've watched the birds outside. I've watched how the birds attack each other. Two little tiny little birds attack the crows and drive them away, and the crows just fly away, even though the crows are about 5 times bigger than the birds. It's really interesting, but that they're territorial, but they also help each other, and that's life.
It's an interesting space. Like, I'm very interested in health tech. So, like, how is AI going to help that?
Oh, that's another big topic. I'm actually an advisor to a group called Artificiality that is studying this and bringing together a lot of the biologists and new thinking about the nature of intelligence, the nature of information processing. So they run an annual conference in Bend, Oregon. They also have this website. They recommend their book recommendations are really wonderful. That um, I'm now one of their advisors. So
That'd be a fun conference to go to.
It is, and it's not your normal technical conference. It's not the technology nerds. It's filled with people who have really deep insights. I just read a book called From Bacteria to AI, written by an English professor. But she's written lots of technical books. She has an amazing knowledge of science, but she comes from the humanities with a very broad, wonderful, powerful insights into what's going on. So,
I'm gonna check it out. Like this is the stuff that I geek out on just because I love it. Like I have all intention of living past 150, and I think it's going to be possible because of all the stuff that's happening, all the
I'll,
advancement.
I'll text you the name of the book.
It's on recording. Don't worry, I got it.
Well, okay, yeah.
But definitely just flick me an email. Much appreciated. But Don, this has been like an incredibly great experience for me, meeting the godfather of UX, and you've done so many cool things. Like, thank you so much for jumping on today. It's been such an insightful conversation. I haven't read your book yet, but I really want to because I think it's something that covers a lot more bases than just, I guess, going deep in one topic.
Well, the book I've written is unlike any of my other books because I do go into history, I go into economics, I go into many, many topics. And I don't talk about usability. I don't talk about making things easy to use at all.
Which all the topics that I really enjoy. So I really want to get into it.
You're right. But if you look at what's the reason, the problems we have in the world are not because some stuff is not usable. It's making things usable is very important, and it does avoid accidents, and it has probably been done a lot of good, but it doesn't cover the major issues. That's why I wrote this new book.
Well, your first book is I guess, the UX playbook, right? So do you think in 10 years' time, this is going to be the new design playbook for making a better world?
Maybe. Who knows?
So, cool. But
it took a while for the design of everyday things to catch on. It got a review in the New York Times, the very first edition, the New York Times book review, the best book review in the United States, which said, "What a stupid book! I don't know who anybody would use it or read it or make sense, etc."
Did you ever write to the person who wrote that article, just giving him like, "Hey"?
Finally, a few years ago, I dug up his and I wrote to him and said, "It's sold about 1 million copies and it's widely used. Would you think you ought to change your mind?" And he wrote back, "No."
Wow, as long as you got through to him. Well, like, yeah, maybe that publicity in the New York Times was actually what you needed to help sort of kick off the people.
No, it wasn't because that was the book was going to become a book of the month club choice, and after that review came out, they didn't do it, and so it did hurt the sales, and even one of my relatives said, "Oh, your book isn't." I just read the review of your book. I'm really sorry to hear that.
So, had they read the book at that time, or just the review of the book?
Yeah, because lots of people read the review to determine if they want to read the book.
I guess it's part of it, right? You can't win over everyone.
But at this point, obviously, that review has long been forgotten.
Well, here's to the next book. Fingers crossed in 10 years' time it has the same cult following.
The next book, this is book number 21. So I write books, yes.
Yeah, you're right. Don, it's been an absolute pleasure once again. I can't thank you enough for jumping on.
No, thank you for having me.
Thanks for watching. Now, remember, please hit subscribe. And if you could leave us a like and a comment, it helps people like yourself find the video.